And it's Ken Kraetzer for CBSI Services, talking business today from our home office in White Plains, New York, and have a chance to visit with one of our friends. Just got back from an international trip, and that is the writer covers the travel and the credit card and the payments and points business, and that is Jason Steele. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's really good to be home, Ken.
I can only imagine now. You described and you wrote two very nice, exciting articles in thepointsguy.com and describing that you and your family took a trip, which you had long planned, in early March to Israel and then South Africa. Tell us a little bit about how you planned it, and then what happened as you were getting set to leave to go to Europe early in March.
Yeah, well, we had planned this trip nearly a year ago. This was kind of my greatest redemption of points and miles ever, or was supposed to be. So back in, say, April of 19, we start redeeming really huge quantities of points and miles to take myself, my wife, our three kids, and a sixth person, a family friend of ours who would be helping with the kids on this grand trip for 3 weeks to Israel and South Africa. My wife is Israeli, so Israel's kind of like a second home for us. We go every year or two, and she has lots of family there. So as the coronavirus thing was starting to become a story in early March, we saw very, very little impact in Israel, very, very little impact here at home, and we didn't really see the need to cancel our trip as few people did. I mean, the planes were full when we were going, and we had an apartment in Israel, which gave us some measure of insulation from other people. We were not in a tourist area, and the events we had were mostly just visiting family and some tourist stuff. Well, shortly after we got to Israel on March 7, they started closing the country down piece by piece, first limiting gatherings to 100 people, then later 50. So we canceled all the tourist attractions just about, and we did things like riding camels in the desert or going to Roman ruins, places where we had a lot of good social distance.
Sure.
We were supposed to depart Israel on, I want to say it was March 15th. And as that date was coming closer, the restrictions were growing and growing. And so we called, in this case, we had a flight on El Al that we purchased using Qantas points. And El Al basically said, talk to Qantas. Fortunately, people were canceling travel quicker than flights themselves were being canceled. So there was a lot of seats available at that precise moment to go on the next earlier flight, which we did, I believe, on March 12th. No, maybe I had that wrong. I think we were supposed to originally leave on March 18th. We left on March 15th. So we were in Israel for 1 week. And we later found out that the March 18th flight that we were supposed to have been on did get canceled. But the March 15th flight, which I believe was a Sunday or a Monday, operated on schedule and actually quite remarkably normal.
So that was the flight you intended to take, or
it was the same flight, just 3 days earlier.
3 days earlier, yeah.
From Tel Aviv to Johannesburg. It normally operates 3 days a week, and so we simply got on the next earlier flight, moving from Wednesday to Sunday, and departed Sunday night. And the airport was clearing out. A lot of flights had already been canceled, but our flight operated as normal. And probably because the next flight had been canceled, it was operating somewhat full, not completely full, but somewhat full. And we entered South Africa that Monday morning without any real anything unusual. They did shine or point one of those infrared thermometers at us, and we had no symptoms, and they let us into the country. Only later did we learn that day they started closing the country off to foreigners. So we just kind of barely got in. We proceeded from the Johannesburg airport to rent a car and drive due east towards the Kruger National Park, which people familiar with South Africa will know that that's kind of the highlight of the safari country in South Africa. And when we got there, we found out that other guests at the safari camp we were supposed to stay at canceled. So we were essentially there alone. So while everyone back home was practicing social isolation, social distancing, we were kind of in the middle of nowhere by ourselves. We felt very socially distant, albeit at the same time they did warn us that there were leopards on the property. So that really seemed like more of a danger to us at that moment.
You had a formal house there? You said, I saw the picture of the lodge. It looked very nice. Was that a real house to stay in?
Well, what it was, and these are very common there, are these tented encampments. So far from a tent that you might backpack with or pitch at a campsite, they're kind of semi-permanent. So they are canvas tents, but at the same time they're built on platforms and they even have running water. So I don't like the term glamping. I don't think there's anything glamorous about it. It's some of the tents don't even have air conditioning, and they're fairly Spartan. But that's kind of the style out there. It's very eco-friendly to build these semi-permanent encampments out there. So that's where we were staying. There were no other guests in the other tents, and we felt very low risk from receiving the virus or transmitting it to others had we been positive for some reason. So that's where we decided to stay. And it was about that time we started hearing about restrictions on entering the U.S. People were being crowded into arrivals halls, both sick and well, and being kept there for hours on end.
Yeah.
And we felt that was more dangerous than waiting till that crowd had passed and then going back a few days later, which is eventually what we did. We had originally planned on returning we changed our tickets. Our original tickets were returning April 1st. We then changed them to March 24th. And we would depart Johannesburg on South African Airlines to London and then United the rest of the way home. But then on Friday, which would be 1 week ago, South African Airlines abruptly ceased operations, which was a surprise to us because, by then we had been traveling internationally for about 10 days, 10, 12 days, and we'd seen a pattern develop where first they would restrict flights and then perhaps later, announce that they'd be ceasing flights at a later date. In fact, right before they ceased operations, South African announced that they were reducing their destinations, but they would continue flying. And then all of a sudden they said, nope, we're not flying immediately as of now, which was a surprise to us. So you can imagine that put us in a little bit of a panic, and we went online to find what we could to get home. That turned out to be on Turkish Airlines, which was serving Johannesburg to Istanbul.
So you went through Istanbul to get back.
Yeah, which
Wow.
actually is not terribly unusual. There's only about, under normal circumstances, I believe there's about 3 flights a day from South Africa to North America, 1 on Delta,
Sure.
2 on South African Airlines. So it's very, very common to go through Europe to get to South Africa. And Istanbul is a major hub for Turkish Airlines, which used to serve at least about a dozen destinations in the U.S. Well, the ticket we had went through San Francisco, which frankly I didn't care. I just wanted to get somewhere
Sure.
in North America. And when we arrived at the Istanbul airport, we saw this, as you normally would see, this big board of multiple monitors showing the flight times and their status and what gate. And it was all yellow. And that, as I approached it, I realized the yellow meant cancel.
Mm.
And so virtually every single flight leaving out of Istanbul was canceled. New York was canceled. LA was canceled. That got me really scared because at that time I thought in the 10 hours between when we left Johannesburg and arrived in Istanbul, apparently Turkish ceased operation. In fact, that was not the case, that our flight being later in the day was not even on the board. And that, of course, it was one of a handful of flights that continued to operate. There was a flight to Atlanta, a flight to Washington, that operated that day. But it was just a small fraction of their flights to the U.S. And it wasn't a coincidence. Clearly, I think most of those flights had been canceled before we booked our ticket. We just, booked a ticket on what was remaining, which was Istanbul to San Francisco, about a 13-hour flight, which we were more than happy to endure.
Wow.
When we got to San Francisco, the place was deserted. Even though our Turkish flights to Istanbul to San Francisco were about 80-85% full by my estimation, the San Francisco airport at 6 p.m. on Sunday was a ghost town, just an utter ghost town. We flew through immigration and customs without anyone in line in front of us. We had to walk a little bit to find an open TSA checkpoint, in which we were the first people in line. We went to a restaurant where we were one of just a handful of customers for takeout. And then we sat at an empty gate, and it was quite funny. They went through their normal boarding announcements, but they did it really quickly. Members of the military, people needing assistance, you can board now. Premier members can board, families can board. Okay, boarding group 1, 2, 3, and 4. I mean, it was just that quick.
Nobody was there except for your family?
We were probably a substantial percentage of the passengers. I think there was about maybe 12 to 15 passengers on the plane, and we were 6 of them. So clearly we had whole rows to ourselves. unsurprisingly, at midnight, the Denver airport was empty too. And arriving home at 1, 2 in the morning on Monday, we were really glad to be home, and it was a very eventful trip. We wish we could have stayed longer. We had such a great time in South Africa, and we were itching to return as soon as this is all over.
Wow, that's quite a story, quite an adventure, and in this unprecedented couple of weeks that we're in with coronavirus and the airport shutdowns and business shutdowns, and you were out traveling, you got back safely with your family. That's the most important thing. And tell you now, considering this all happened when you were traveling on airline points for the most part, how did it make a difference that you were using points rather than if you had paid for tickets?
Sure, it did make a bit of a difference, I think, because, for example, when we had to move our flight, our El Al flight from Tel Aviv to Joburg, we had to move that up by 3 days. El Al just said, can't help you, talk to Qantas. It was Qantas points that we had used, which we had transferred from the city thank you points program. And so, but I think that would have been true if we had booked that ticket through a travel agent or through any other frequent flyer program other than El Al's own program. Because when you book a flight on carrier A using points, miles, or even cash with carrier B or a travel agent, you're really adding unnecessary complexity to it. In our case, that complexity was okay, considering we got to travel for free. But in an extreme emergency like this, that complexity was a disaster. Where we have a ticket on El Al, and El Al says, can't help you, talk to Qantas. Qantas, of course, doesn't have an office in El Al. They don't, in Israel, they don't serve Israel. It was extremely difficult to get them on the phone. And the only thing they were willing to do for us was to let us change the ticket to another available award ticket, which thankfully was available because everyone was canceling their flights left and right, or canceling their reservations left and right.
Yeah, that was very fortunate.
Yeah, and not only that, it really upset me that Qantas wouldn't even waive their change fees. That really upset me, although I've been told that if I get a hold of them now, they would probably refund that. It was actually in points. And then when returning from South Africa, United really couldn't help us because we were on award tickets and there were no awards available. And South African, under normal circumstances, if South African Airlines canceled a flight, they would either put us on the next flight or they'd maybe try to rebook us on another airline. Well, if the airline itself just goes belly up, the best you can hope for is a refund of your points from in this case United that ticketed the reservation. And since we were in a place that United did not serve, it's not like if we were in London and we had a ticket on Lufthansa or something like that. Well, United would have put us on their flight from London to the United States. In Johannesburg, South Africa, simply not an option. United doesn't fly there. They had some limited service to Cape Town that was ending, and it was all booked up anyway. And so that wasn't even an option.
And I'm talking with Jason Steele, who's a writer covering the credit card industry, and in particular the points segment, often featured in the Points Guy publications, newsletters. Jason, you mentioned difficulty getting Qantas Airlines on the phone, I believe you said. How did you find where you were able to communicate? Was it online? Was it on the phone? Was it at ticket counters? Well, how did you communicate with the airlines when you had to make payments?
Well, we went to the airport to communicate with El Al in person, which was convenient for us, but they didn't help us, so it was kind of pointless. And then with Qantas, we tried downloading their app, which supposedly had some chat functionality. That didn't work. On multiple occasions, we were on hold with Qantas for 2 hours, and the call got disconnected. So that didn't work. What was really bizarre was that if we called and chose to talk to their frequent flyer program, they picked up the phone right away. So if I needed to, change my address with my frequent flyer program, they were happy to help me. If I needed to change my flight in an emergency, nothing. So we got on the phone, and at least talking to a human, we begged them for help. We told them we were in a country that was locking down, that we had to get out on the next flight, that we held tickets, that we needed changed. And so the person we talked to transferred us to their customer service line, which I suppose was different than the reservations line. Thankfully, they picked up within a few minutes and were able to assist us. So that was really a frustrating part of the whole experience. I think had we been in one country that was experiencing an emergency, I don't think we'd had problems. But the fact that the whole world was experiencing this emergency at once made communication with airlines extremely difficult.
So unprecedented. Did
Yeah.
you interact with any of the bank customer service capabilities when you're trying to make changes or on the trip?
Yeah, I mean, the closest we did was I remember seeing some article that said American Express Travel was of assistance to people trying to get out of a country. So I said, what the heck, let's give it a try. We called American Express Travel. We got connected with somebody who didn't really seem to understand what we were telling them, and then got disconnected, and we tried to call back, and we weren't able to reach anyone. We kind of just gave up on that. So thankfully, at that moment, last Friday, we had good internet service at the lodge that we were at, which is unusual. And then I started going through the airlines that serve South Africa one by one, trying to get on the website, trying to book a ticket. And Turkish actually is a really good airline in good times and bad. I've flown them before, so I was really happy to purchase a ticket from them relatively quickly while I could. My hunch is that there was a lot of no-shows, people who might have maybe booked a ticket months ago and clearly had no interest in flying. So even though it felt like we were having trouble getting that ticket purchased, in the end when we flew it, it was about 80% full.
Sure.
So I imagine some of those advanced sales just didn't show.
Sure, we are fortunate in that respect. Now, we're obviously in an unprecedented business and airline hotel situation right now. I was talking with a local business school professor who said that the airlines are a key part of infrastructure, and getting the airlines up running again is a key to recovery and to restarting the economy. What are you hearing from your contacts with the airlines about how much service they're going to continue to operate during this period, and how long it would take them to restart up?
Yeah, I really see two different formulas here. One is the formula that's being taken by American carriers, Delta, United, American, Southwest, and others, that we're going to keep a skeleton service going. We'll reduce our supply to meet demand. We'll park the planes and we'll keep flying. And that's what United is doing. They're still flying to Israel, frankly, which is not even allowing foreign visitors in. But clearly there are Israelis in America and Americans in Israel that are trying to get home, people with dual citizenship. So that's a really great thing they're doing. On the other hand, there's a lot of carriers, mostly overseas, that are just saying, we give up. El Al, stop flying. South Africans, stop flying. Qantas pretty much stopped flying international, and on and on and on. So a lot of these carriers, I think they used to be state carriers and now they're private carriers, and they're just saying, hey, if we're just a business like any other business, if we have no customers, why should we open our doors, metaphorically speaking? So, I also agree with you that it's critical infrastructure, and especially I think most countries need an airline to serve them, even if it's just to get doctors back and forth or to repatriate their citizens. That's a critical thing that I think a lot of countries are looking at. Thankfully, we're not there in the United States. Americans can travel to a number of destinations should they have an emergency need to do so, because Delta, American, and United are continuing service to some destinations, certainly not all. So I think when this is over, countries are going to reevaluate their relationships with their national or former national carriers and say, in an emergency, we want this carrier to link us to the outside world, and we're willing to subsidize you to do that. I'd like to think countries will do that. As to restarting it, I think the model here is 9/11, when airlines really did have to end service altogether 100%. But it's not a very, and frankly, I speak to you not just as a travel expert, but I also happen to be a commercial pilot. And aircraft, they like to be flown. They don't like to be parked. But there are special procedures when you park a plane that you do to keep it ready to be restarted at any time. You hope to keep the pilots current, which you can do in simulators to a large extent. You can't just go from zero to a full schedule tomorrow, but that's unlikely that would ever be needed. So you would, perform the maintenance tasks necessary to kind of reactivate an aircraft. You would perform the training tasks necessary to reactivate pilots and other crew, and you would slowly start reactivating the airline, which is hopefully what we'll be seeing in the coming months.
Yeah, there have been reports of runways, I think, in Atlanta taken for parking airplanes wingtip to wingtip. And
I heard that. I'm a former Atlanta resident and a frequent visitor, and I kind of proudly know that that's the busiest airport in the world. And it's a very shocking image to see the runways, some of those valuable real estate in aviation, with planes parked in them.
Absolutely. Now, Jason, as we monitor the situation, and hopefully the medical part of this resolves itself very soon, what will be some of the stories and some of the aspects of this coronavirus situation that you'll be monitoring and writing about?
Well, I think, you know, right behind the health effects, at least in this country, have been the financial effects. And, you know, when we talk about personal finance, we talk about credit cards, people need to adjust their kind of what I call the plastic portfolio to reflect their needs. That could be, you know, a 0% APR. It could be earning maybe cash back rewards for a while instead of travel rewards. Or if you're optimistic, it could be kind of restocking your cash of points for hopefully later in this year when we return to the skies, and after some time sitting around the house, many of us will be eager for a vacation when it's safe to do so.
Absolutely. We're all looking forward to that day when this situation is behind us, and as we recognize and admire and really are in awe of the tremendous job that are being done by medical professionals, especially right here in the New York area, with the volume of patients that they're sadly being asked to treat. And so we really think of them today, and those around the country as well. But Jason, it's great to hear about your story. I mean, that's an adventure. We have some family stories from my family traveling back and forth on military trips that were a little harrowing back in the 1940s and 50s in a different era. But you really knew how to manage that. And it's great to hear how you were able to communicate with the different carriers, and you were able to get the service and the changes that you needed so that you and your family could comfortably travel back to the United States.
Yeah, we're really glad to be home.
Jason Steele, great to talk with you, featured in the Points Guy. What other publications are you in this year?
NerdWallet, Business Insider. You know, I recently started writing for USA Today, written for Forbes. You know, just a self financial. I read for Clark Howard's website, and others that don't come to mind at this moment.
And we're looking forward to your conference when things are back to normal in November. Your credit card writers and media conference. Is the plan still for Denver area?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, no one can see the future. At the moment, I have not canceled the event. We're all hoping the world returns to some kind of normalcy by late this fall. And, you know, we'll just take this kind of month by month and focus on getting through this crisis. And then maybe as we get closer to the event sometime in the summer, if, you know, when the time is right, we'll either kind of reconfirm that it's going to continue, or if we have to, we'll cancel or postpone the event, keeping safety in mind above all else.
Well, Jason Steele, we certainly enjoyed participating in your event in Washington. That was a great event last fall, and look forward to this year. And great to hear your story of your travels to Israel and to South Africa, and being able to travel home safely. Really a fascinating story to hear about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always great to talk to you, Ken.
Our pleasure. Jason Steele. And this is Ken Kraetzer for CBSI Services, talking business from my home office in White Plains, New York. Stay safe, everybody. Have a good evening.